Well, Bob, thank you very much. That was a very generous introduction. And can I not only acknowledge you, but your wonderful wife, Greer, and the other members of your family. Gary Spence, the President of the LNP, Senator Amanda Stoker, Larry Anthony, the Federal President of the National Party, Sir Leo Hilscher. I went 15 rounds with him at a few Premiers' conferences some years ago. Yeah. It was declared a tie in the end, but and to many other people who I should acknowledge, but time prevents me from doing. Can I say how very happy I am to be back in Queensland? I do have, Graham Young, can I say, I do have very fond recollections of Queensland, particularly the 1996 election. In 1996, the coalition in Queensland recorded 60.5% of the two-party preferred vote, and along with a two-party preferred vote of the same dimension achieved by the Harold Holt-led Liberal government in 1996. It's the biggest two-party preferred vote ever achieved across a state in any election, and Bob Tucker was the president of the Queensland division of the Liberal Party on that particular occasion, and I thank him. And I also notice in the audience Ashley Goldsworthy, wonderful former federal president of the Liberal Party, who's gone many rounds on our behalf through some good years and some bad. Somebody mentioned Graham Morris. Graham Morris is somebody I remember very warmly. On the night of the election in 1996. There were a group of us at the Intercontinental Hotel in Sydney, and we had a couple of people from the Electoral Commission there, and they were going to feed us the first results. And at about 6:20, a result came in from a tiny polling booth called Portland East in rural New South Wales in the electorate of Macquarie. And the bloke from the electorate office said to me, "Mr. Howe, this is good. There's a swing of 16% to the Liberal Party in that polling booth." And I said, "Terrific." Graham Morris said, "Hang on, Tiger, there's only 80 people enrolled at that booth." But as the night wore on, although we didn't get 16% everywhere, although we got 19% in a place called Oxley in Queensland, remember that? We, of course, won a great harvest of seats in Queensland, and apart from the state going off the reservation in 2007, Queensland was very kind to the coalition government in all the years that we were in government. Now, I thought I had finished writing books. I wrote a book about my own life in politics, and I was also delighted to do a book about the Menzies years. And I felt that those years and the foundations the Menzies period represented for the modern Australia deserved a lot more attention from our side of politics. And I'm very glad I did that. But then the Menzies Research Centre, along with those wonderful publishers, Connaught, came along and said, would you be happy if we put together a collection of your speeches? And I'm delighted they did, and I'm very, very touched that Bob and his colleagues at the Institute should want me to come along today and say something very briefly about the book. It's a matter really for others to talk about, but really to reflect on some of the things that have happened to Australian politics over the last 10 years, but more importantly, what is likely to happen to Australian politics in the months and years ahead. Can I start that analysis by saying that I think the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has made a very good start. I think he's made a terrific start. I think he's... Look, I know it's not easy to have changes of Prime Minister as frequently as we've had, and there's no point in an audience as committed and as sophisticated and as dedicated, broadly speaking, let me surmise, to the centre-right cause, there's not much point in sort of mincing words on that subject. We have had a turbulent period. Political parties change leaders for one reason, and I ought to know because I've been both the subject and the beneficiary of a few changes over the period that I've been in politics. They change out of a belief that there is electoral advantage in making a change. That's what it boils down to. I've read a lot of commentary, and I read a lot of commentary about earlier change, but in the end, it's all driven relentlessly by the laws of political arithmetic. If you think that a change of leader, personality at the top, is going to bring about a greater electoral advantage, you do it. Now, I pay tribute to what Tony Abbott did as Prime Minister. I pay tribute to what he did as Leader of the Opposition. He's one of only 4 people in the history of the Liberal Party that took the party into government from opposition: Menzies, Fraser, Howard and Abbott. And he achieved a significant victory in 2013. But the party decided decisively to replace him with Malcolm Turnbull, and just as I had supported Tony Abbott, I supported Malcolm Turnbull, and I give tribute to him for many of the things that he achieved. Particularly, I think he managed our relationship with our major trading partner, but potential strategic adversary, China, extremely well. And the speech he made at the University of New South Wales in the last few weeks he was Prime Minister very successfully reset our relationship with China. It's a difficult relationship. China is our best customer, but China is an authoritarian communist country. Let's not mince words about it. It has a far more dictatorial government now than it had when I was Prime Minister and I dealt with Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. They weren't Democrats by any means, but certainly there was a different relationship. So I think the contribution that he made should also be honoured. But the party has chosen a new leader. He brings to that office high intelligence, enormous energy, and a determination without losing any time to address things that ought to be addressed. And can I say I'm delighted that he appears to have reconciled the government with the Catholic school sector, an issue that I think should have been fixed a long time ago. Should never have happened. I mean, I believe in freedom of choice in education, and that means you've got to have a proper environment. And I speak as somebody who was totally educated in the government education system and remain grateful to the New South Wales education system for the education that I received at the 2 public schools I attended. But I'm a believer in choice, and I think the decisions that have been made in the last couple of days and announced are very, very important decisions, and they reinforce choice. And what encourages me that the right decision's been made not only in principle but also on political grounds is that a couple of weeks ago the Labor Party was attacking the government, the coalition, for being unfair to Catholic schools. It's now attacking the government for being unfair to public schools. So I think we must be onto something. I think we must have got it right. But my friends, we have a tough fight, and I presume to use the generic to describe the broad challenge facing centre-right forces in Australia. And we will need all our unity and our intelligence and our energy to achieve the result that I know many in this room will want to see achieved whenever the next federal election is held. It is important to do what I am sure your organisation does, and that is to stress the battle of ideas which is at the heart of politics. The person who had the greatest influence on me in politics from a point of view of political thinking and strategy is a man who many of you would know, many of you wouldn't know, Sir John Carrick. John died only 4 months ago, and he was only about 3 months short of his 100th birthday. He'd been born while World War I was still in progress, and he'd been a prisoner of war of the Japanese on the Burma-Thailand Railway. He became director of the Liberal Party in New South Wales not long after he returned from the war, was very close to Bob Menzies, entered the Senate, became leader of the government in the Senate in the Fraser government, and he was Federal Minister for Education and also for National Development and Energy. But he always told me, and I've never forgotten this advice, that at its essence, politics is a contest of ideas. It's not a public relations tournament. And that is something that is so fundamental to political success. And we always do best as a political movement when we understand that. We also do best as a political movement when we put aside too much of a focus on the range of views within our own ranks. I keep reading, and it does annoy me a lot, stories about conservatives and moderates and this or that faction inside the Liberal Party. One of the expressions that I hope I have bequeathed to the Liberal Party conscience is the expression the broad church. And I mean that in a political sense. It has a theological origin, but in a political sense, what it means is something that I believe very devoutly. If I can invoke some theological language, very devoutly, that the Liberal Party in Australia, and I'm sure this applies to most people who identify with the National Party as well, the Liberal Party in Australia has always been the trustee of two great political traditions. That is the classical Liberal tradition and the Conservative tradition. The Liberal Party and the National Party should always be seen by people who regard themselves as conservative as their natural political home. And one of the challenges that we obviously face at the present time is to prevent too many people peeling off to the right-hand side of politics towards some rather errant political ideas. We need to make certain that we remain attractive, but not in a way that repels people whose views on certain issues may not be as conservative as those of other people within the party. We need to emphasise the broad church character of our party, and we always do best when we do that. We always do poorly when one or other section of the party claims a greater legitimacy to the soul of the Liberal Party. When people say, the true essence of the Liberal Party is that it's a conservative party and nothing else. I don't want to hear that, nor do I want to hear people saying the true essence of the Liberal Party is that it's a small L Liberal Party and nothing else. I don't want to hear that either. We have to ensure that we are broad enough and intelligent enough to embrace both of those strands. That was the philosophy that I tried to bring to the party. I believe it is the philosophy that Scott Morrison will try to bring to the party, and there are already very good signs that he is doing that. Politics around the world at the present time is different. There's no doubt about that. People keep saying to me, what do you think of Donald Trump? Well, let me tell you, I think Donald Trump is different. But more importantly than what I think is the American people voted for him. And if I've got a message for the Democrats of the United States, get over it. You're lost, and focus on trying to win the next time you have an opportunity of running a candidate. And that I think the Democrats in the United States have engaged in the longest dummy spit in political history that I've seen. And they just have to get over it. Now, there are things about Donald Trump that I don't like at all. I think it saddened me immensely that through a combination of things he said and attitudes he struck, he wasn't able to be present at the National Memorial Service for John McCain in Washington. So sad. A man who had put his life on the line, had endured the torture of his Vietnamese captors. That was just so sad. But can I say he showed a courage in relation to the Syrians when that red line was crossed, and that his Democrat predecessor didn't. I think his tax program, which he got through the House of Representatives and the Senate, is first class. I am very, very uneasy about his protectionist tendencies, but there's not much doubt that people who hold up China as some kind of paragon of free trade haven't read much about economics or international trade exchanges. And might I say the same thing would apply to the European Union. I mean, I keep reading lectures from the Europeans about free trade. Gee. Anyway, don't start me on that. I'll really get into trouble. But my friends, what is happening around the world is that the traditional democracies are all going through periods of volatility, and it manifests itself in different ways. Most people were surprised that Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, and an equal number of people, or even more, were surprised that he won the election. The British voted, in my view, wisely to leave the European Union. If I'd have been British, I'd have voted to leave the European Union. But then, unfortunately, the implementation of that has stumbled because the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, called an election when she didn't need to, and instead of getting a bigger majority, she went backwards. And as Bob said, the most important commodity you have in politics as a leader is authority. Authority is more important than popularity. You can have authority even when you're unpopular, although if it goes on, if the disconnect goes on for too long, it does start to get a bit uncomfortable. But it's a question of, I guess, of balance. But what is important is to understand that around the world at the present time, there is volatility. You have this extraordinary outcome in Italy where you have a coalition of the far right and the far left. In France, you had Macron blitzing the two traditional parties of the centre-left and the centre-right. And so you have a lot of volatility. And people are saying, well, does this mean that the democratic mould is under threat? No, it doesn't mean that. What it means is that politics now is different. Politics now is less tribal. Politics now is no longer defined by the old divide between East and West as represented by the Cold War. Politics is producing this volatility which is manifesting itself in different ways in different parts of the world. And of course we've seen in our own country, we've seen this atypical turnover of people at the top. But fundamentally, the system is not broken, but it will only remain the most viable and workable system if we understand what Bob said and I said at the beginning, and that is that politics in the end is a contest of ideas and of values. I'm occasionally asked to make speeches and talk about my experiences as a leader, and I said that the most important commodity that any leader can have, whether it's in politics or anything else, is to stand for something and for people to know what you stand for. If people know what you stand for, then you can chart a course and you can hope to succeed. And I think it's very, very important that in the months that lie ahead, that our two coalition parties make it very, very clear to the Australian electorate what they stand for. We know what our opponents stand for, and I make no hesitation in saying to this gathering, or indeed any other gathering, this is the most left-wing disposed Labor Party I have seen since I entered politics in 1974. It is far more left-wing disposed than the Hawke government was. Indeed, there were many things the Hawke government did that I strongly supported because they were sensible policy reforms. But the anti-business attitude of the current opposition, the taxes that will be imposed on retirement savings, the punitive approach to wealth creation, all of those things are anathema to the sort of things that our two parties believe in and the sort of things that we know are important to the building of a prosperous Australia. My friends, thank you very much for coming along. There are many people here who I've known for a very long time, and particularly, of course, through your membership of the Liberal Party and the National Party, and in its more recent Queensland iteration, the LNP. And can I just say to you again, thank you for all the support and the loyalty that you extended to me. I would never have achieved what I did in public life without the support, the loyalty and the endurance of the Liberal Party. I owe the Liberal Party so much, and I've never forgotten that. I never took its support for granted, and I don't now take it for granted, although I'm out of active politics. It's a great organisation. It's had its ups and downs. It's made a lot of mistakes, but its heart and its soul is fundamentally very good. And if its values can be promoted along with our National Party friends, and I can't stress too strongly how important across the nation that bond between the Liberal Party and the National Party is. One of the reasons my government was so successful was that I had a lot of very, very good people at the top, people like Peter Costello and Alexander Downer, for example, who were outstanding and were in their two positions for the entirety of the government. It was one of the reasons we were so strong and stable, but also the coalition between the Liberal Party and the National Party, and the bond that I developed with Tim Fischer and John Anderson and Mark Vaile and his ministers. That is so important. Now, we'll have our differences, but at the end of the day, we're on the same track, and our enemy's over there. It's not beside us, it's over there. And I think it is so very important that we keep that in mind. So my message out of that is I'm still enthusiastic. I'm still very hopeful. We've got a big fight ahead of us. But if we remember what our core values are, and if I'm any judge of the opinion polls, and I've read them all of my life, and you do in politics, you might say I don't take any notice of opinion polls, but whenever a politician says that to you, don't believe him. Don't believe. Malcolm Fraser may have invented that wonderful phrase when he said there's only one poll that counts. He may have done that, but I tell you what, Malcolm followed the polls very closely. I followed them very closely, and I read those polls as saying, sure, they're grumpy with us at the moment for a number of reasons, but they're prepared to have a look at the new man. On a personal rating, he's got off to a very good start, and they don't like the alternative. Because one of the things that if you read all those polls, they'll tell you is that in the lead up to 1996, our primary vote was well into the 40s consistently. And in the lead up to 2007, as I painfully remember, the Labor Party's primary vote was well into the 40s. And in the lead up to 2013, the coalition primary vote was well into the 40s and had remained there for a long time. That hasn't been the case in the lead up to the coming election, and that gives me some hope. But my friends, thank you very much for coming. It's been a great delight to be back in Brisbane. Thank you.